value. Value means importance, worth, or usefulness of something. Value is akin to mattering. Mattering means the importance or significance. And what about this freedom to be equal? It is not only that he has showed us who he was, he is showing us in real time, and we must believe him. You cannot say on a Monday that you support Dr. King and on a Wednesday refuse to tell his story. You cannot say... You cannot say you are here to serve all the children of Florida, especially our children, but only when it serves your political ambitions. You're going to hear about what we need to do, and you're going to hear about how we're going to hold these people accountable for their audacious assault on black folks and the hypocrisy with our children. But this is what I want to tell you. They want us to be tired. They want us to get weary. But I'm holding on to the promise. I'm holding on to the promise. Let us not grow weary in well-doing, for we shall reap a harvest if we faint not. And now I'm going to introduce Senator Gerald D. Thompson. My God, I'm just glad I had to go after her, honey.
Thank you, and good afternoon. The late black author James Baldwin said, "I can't hear what you say because I see what you do." And what we hear in Florida is that African American history is required instruction in our schools. That's what we hear. Yeah. What we see is that for almost 30 years, that law has been on the books and it has not been enforced. That's what we see.
Break it down, Geraldine.
Now, we are here today to serve notice that it's time out for hypocrisy. It's time out for hypocrisy. What time is it? Time out! Time out for hypocrisy. 30 years, and there has been no consequence whatsoever for instructors who are not teaching African American history. If we say that the speed limit is 70 and someone goes 80, the highway patrol is there with some consequences. But there have been no consequences for not teaching African American history. What time is it? Time out. It's time out for hypocrisy. Now, the courses that were to be taught on African American history were intended to explore how individual freedoms have been infringed by slavery, racial oppression, segregation, racial discrimination, and laws that resulted in racial oppression, racial segregation, and racial discrimination, and to highlight those individuals who work to overturn unjust laws. But we're told by Ron DeSantis that this kind of history has no educational value. It's time out for hypocrisy. Time out for hypocrisy. In the state of Florida, there are 67 school districts, 67 counties. Only 12 of them have been deemed to be doing an exemplary job in teaching African American history. And this determination was made by the Commissioner of Education's African American History Task Force. 12 out of 67. What time is it? Time out. Time out for hypocrisy. Now, what are we going to do in terms of consequences? If it's not taught, someone needs to be held accountable.
That's right.
Someone needs to be held accountable. The 12, those districts that are exemplary, what are they doing differently? Well, they've adopted textbooks that depict African American people. Do you remember seeing African American people in your textbooks? No. It's time out for hypocrisy. Time out. What time is it? Time out. Time out for hypocrisy. So they have textbooks They have staff training. Do you know there are some instructors who were surprised to know that in 1994 this law was put on the books? Why would they be surprised? Because no one ever told them. No one ever said you have to teach this. And so what time is it? Time out for hypocrisy. They have developed a curriculum. That's what the 12 have done, their own curriculum. They didn't wait for the College Board to do it. They developed their own curriculum. And their school boards adopted instruction in African American history as a priority. That is what African American history ought to be in all 67 counties. They've developed curriculum guides in the 12 counties that are teaching it. And they are teaching it across 180 days. That's the length of the school year. They're not just doing it in February as an afterthought, as an aside, as an addendum. They are teaching it 180 days a year. And so we're here today to say we understand what you say, but we can't hear what you say because we see what you do. So we want to say today that it's time out for hypocrisy, and it's time to make this law real. It's time for consequences when it is not taught. So we're serving notice today by our presence that we want the African American History Task Force in the state of Florida appropriately funded. What time is it? Time out for hypocrisy. We want to make sure that laws that apply to public schools apply to all schools. I'm working with Representative Gallup Franklin, and we have a bill that says that any school that receives tax dollars would be required to teach African American history. And what time is it? Time out for hypocrisy. So we want the African American History Task Force appropriately funded. We want recognition that this has educational value, that our lives and our contributions have educational value. And remember Governor DeSantis, remember Commissioner Diaz, remember all of the officials. We can't hear what you say because we see what you do. And I'd now like to introduce the chair of the Florida Black Legislative Caucus, Representative Diane Hart.
Thank you. Before I begin, I'd like to say to the former representatives who are here this afternoon, thank you for joining us. That's Senator Tony Hill, Senator Dwight Bullard, and we also have Senator Lorraine Osley standing up at the top. I also want to thank NBCSL. For those of you all who don't know what that is, that's the National Black Caucus state legislators, for having Representative Flowers here from Arkansas with us today. Everybody all around the country knows how important this is. Amen. The goal is the advancement of knowledge and the dissemination of truth, said President John Kennedy. Good afternoon. I'm State Representative Diane Hart, representing House District 63. I also serve as chair of the Florida Legislative Black Caucus, which she just told you. I also chair Region 6 for the National Caucus of Black State Legislators. I'm here to disseminate some truth today. We've been here before. Under this governor, our people have been attacked, our culture has been dismissed, and now we're being told that our history lacks educational value. Education is a critical part of an individual's personal foundation, and when you choose to build a foundation on falsehoods, lies, or by simply erasing history, you've laid a foundation that will ultimately fail. I can only think of one reason why this state, a state that my colleagues and this governor have called the freest state in the country, would try to hide the truth. They're afraid. What are they afraid of? What is the governor afraid of? They're afraid that by learning the truth about African American history, that black children will change? Are you afraid that the truth about what has inspired in America will ruin the vain perspective of American exceptionalism that we push on the world? Are you afraid that your children and grandchildren will see you in their textbooks in direct opposition to the notion that all of us are created equal? I've learned that fear and intimidation will never stop the truth. Truth is something unlike fear that never dies. Amen. All students deserve a quality education that is honest about our history, and it's time that our state stop trying to hide it. While our history is being erased before our eyes, legislative leaders have launched another attack on our education in the form of HB1. The last thing we need is to move to a private, more of our public education system, to privatize more of it. We know that these private schools have a history of curriculums that do not teach or value black history. It's time to give parents more choices in public education that highlight the full experience of black America. However, while we continue to push the state to fulfill this obligation, I'm calling on organizations such as the NAACP, the National Council of Negro Women, clergy leaders, National Panhellenic Councils, and others to join us in taking to educating our own children. Amen. For the constituents who've called my office asking what can they do, call and email the governor, the Speaker of the House, and your Senate President, and tell them to keep AP, African American History, as an option in Florida schools. No longer will we wait for the governor or even the Department of Education to see its value. We know for ourselves the importance of black people and the rich history that we as a community have contributed to the story of America. Amen. And by all of us coming together, our children will know it too. Because at the end of the day, this is about our children. That's right. So now I bring to the podium Senator Jones, a gentleman who really needs no introduction, a man who cares for the least of them. So I thank you so much.
I want to start off by talking to my colleagues who stand with me. In church, we sing a song, "We've come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord." But then it goes on and say, trusting in his holy word. He has never failed us yet. To my colleagues, I tell you that the moment that we are in right now, I repeat what Representative Ranger said. Don't get weary in well-doing, because we will reap a harvest, but we cannot give up. I want to thank the clergy from across the state who are here. It's too many to name. I want to thank Attorney Crump and the student leaders who are here today. But I want to go back and thank, once again, my colleagues in both the House and the Senate who are here today. We're not standing here for an exercise. That's right. We're not standing here because it's cute to stand here. We're standing here because we're resisting and we refuse to allow this to happen. We are dealing with the structure of a system that continues to perpetuate racism across this country and in this state. And let me clear this up. This is not just a Florida problem. Hear me what I'm telling y'all. Florida is just a petri dish. Tell it. But people from across the country should be concerned of what legislatures and what governors are doing and what they are watching Florida to do, because they believe if it can happen in Florida, it can happen in Tennessee, it can happen in Colorado. We want to resist right here, right now. Ron DeSantis is a problem, but he is not the problem. The problem that we are facing is that we are not dealing with the bigger issue at hand. Crumbling schools. That's right. dilapidated buildings in our communities, high property insurance, like Leader Driscoll said. These are the issues that's being ignored because we have to deal with the promotion of Jim Crow 3.0 by people who don't know and don't care about what's happening in black communities, but they desire to referee how you teach our history.
Time out.
Focusing on AP African American Studies, that's what we're dealing with now. But the bigger issue that's at play is being ignored. We're being told to simply cry about it by the governor's staff.
That's what he said.
Time out.
But we will not do that. Now this has our full attention, not just here within the state of Florida, but across this nation. Not just with politicians, but with community leaders. Not just with adults, but with children also. Amen. Florida offers several cultural AP courses, including European history, including Japanese language and culture, including AP German language and culture. Just like those histories has value, God dog it, my history got value too. Young people young people have to be exposed to the world's rich diversity to grow into informed global citizens who practice empathy, who can explore their curiosities and have the foundation to be able to collaborate for the greater good of all of us. The fight is not just about this AP course. The fight is against the strong uprising of racism from people who are seeing the shifting of America.
That's right. That's right.
While the full and accurate historical record might make some uncomfortable,
That's right.
good. Good that you're uncomfortable.
Good.
That is the point of why we have to teach accurate history. Because when you don't teach history, we're bound to repeat it. And as human beings, we should be repulsed by the inhumane treatment of historically excluded groups in the United States, especially the group that represents 22% of this state, black people in the state of Florida. We have to get serious about returning power to the people of this state. But let me tell y'all something, because I started off with it and I'm going to end with it. We've come this far by faith. Leaning on the Lord. And if you're going to believe in the Lord, you leaned on somebody. And I'll tell you this. I have faith in people. And I have so much hope in our future. We have always recovered. We have always been resilient. And we will always resist. You beat us and we recovered. You sprayed us and we recovered. You disenfranchised us and we recovered. And we have to remain strong and resilient as we have always done, even through this, until no one can bother us again. But here's what my hope is.
Come on.
And here's where I will end. We are not afraid to solve these issues ourselves.
That's right.
Because we understand ain't nobody coming to save us.
Amen.
And we get it. And because nobody coming to save us, we're going to save ourselves. At this time, I would like to introduce no stranger to this house, no stranger to this state, the treasurer of the American Federation of Teachers, all of our good friend, Mr. Fed Ingram.
All right.
Hi, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Fed Ingram. I represent 1.7 million teachers from across this country, inclusive of 200,000 of those teachers right here in the state of Florida that represent 2.8 million children here that are being taught by my colleagues right now as we speak. In those classrooms, we have social studies teachers and civics teachers and people who care about history who are afraid to teach honest history. Mr. DeSantis, what part are you afraid of? Is it slavery? Is it civil rights? Is it Reconstruction? Is it the fact that we've had a president who looks like me? What part scares you, Mr. DeSantis? You are the governor. You are not the king. Our history matters. Because all history matters. The truth matters. And sometimes in America, our history is good, bad, and ugly. But all of it needs to be taught so that our young people can make conscious decisions for themselves. And so we're asking you on behalf of all of these teachers who create all of this great learning and all of this great teaching that's going on in the state of Florida, leave us alone. Let us do our job. Give us the resources that we need. Give us the magic working material that we always ask for, because that's what we need to create a better environment for our students. Let me say to the general public, this is not step one for Mr. DeSantis. Mr. DeSantis has banned books in the state of Florida. Mr. DeSantis has said openly and loudly that he is going to take over school boards and politicize them for his own good. Mr. DeSantis is trying to squelch teacher voice. Teachers are in the classroom and afraid to say anything about what happens to their children. Mr. DeSantis does not want us to teach honest history. Mr. DeSantis is running against people who are LGBTQ in this state. And this is about AP African American history. Sir, the best and brightest of our students would take this class. It's an optional class. It is something that we want and what we need to invest in our community so that the state of Florida is part of the United States of America, Mr. DeSantis. So I will simply end with this. We have some young people here who are our best and brightest. These young people, regardless of where they come from, their social, economic background, no matter how they look, no matter what their culture is, they deserve the best of what we have to give them. And to say, Mr. Diaz and Mr. DeSantis, that this has no educational value, shame on you. Shame on you, Mr. DeSantis. All of these people came here today to speak truth to power. But we have lawmakers in here who are committed to standing together, and so I want to thank them for that. We have clergy and pastors from all over this state who are committed to preaching this in their pulpits to let you know that we're not afraid of you. We have community activists in here whose names will never be said, but they will do the hard work of organizing against what is not right. So, Mr. DeSantis, again, you are the governor. You are not my king. And we will teach AP African American history. Thank you. I want to introduce to you. I'm sorry.
You good? No, you good. No, you good. Well, like you could dig it, Fed. But he deserves. He needs no introduction. Please, let's bring up to the stage Mr. Ben Crump.
All for being here, especially to the leaders, the clergy, and to all of the activists in the community who said, hell no. Hell no. We have to remember that it's so important, this cause, this fight, so much is at stake. I'm Attorney Ben Crump, along with Attorney Craig Wisenhunt and with Attorney Precious Chavez and the NAACP, as well as the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. We're here to give notice to Governor DeSantis that if he does not negotiate with the College Board to allow AP African American Studies to be taught in the classrooms across the state of Florida, that these three young people will be the lead plaintiffs in a historic lawsuit. And you all need to remember their names. because it's their courageous tenacity and their intellect that reminds me, Reverend Holmes, many of the examples that were shown to the world by a young John Lewis, a young Julian Bond, a young Fannie Lou Hamer. You will remember the names of Elijah Edwards, of Victoria Heckman, of Victoria McQueen, and Juliet Heckman. Now, this is what it's about. It is about them. This is what the fight is for. Never, ever forget that. And the fact that they're coming forward in this consequential moment in history can never be taken lightly. Now, you're going to hear from them in a minute after you hear from my co-counsel, Craig Wisenhut, who has previously been victorious in challenging Governor DeSantis with the mask mandate. But I think, Senator Osgood, I do think it's important, though, that we remember what Carter G. Woodson, known as the father of black history, said. He said, a race, if a race has no history, if a race has no worthwhile traditions that are respected and taught to the youth, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world. And it stands in danger, Senator Jones, of being exterminated. And so the question really is this, brothers and sisters. Are we going to let Governor DeSantis or anybody exterminate black history from the classrooms in Florida? No. Senator Hill, will we let Governor DeSantis or anybody exterminate black history in the classrooms across America? No. Yeah, what this really is about is saying you cannot exterminate us, you cannot exterminate our culture, and you can never exterminate the value of our children to this world. Governor DeSantis, are you really trying to lead us into an era akin to communism that provides censorship of free thoughts? Or are we going to make sure that Governor DeSantis understands that we will stand on the American principles of the free exchange of ideas, whether those are ideals and culture of European history, whether those are ideals and culture of German history, whether those are ideals and culture of Japanese history, whether those are ideals and culture of Brazilian, Canadian, everybody who is here in America. You have a right to have your culture, your history respected and taught to the children of America. We say no to censorship. We say yes to community. No to censorship. Yes to community. No to censorship. Yes to community. No to censorship. Yes to community. Because as Dr. King taught us, we're all part of the beloved community. And my final thoughts are simply this. As the court wrote in November, when it granted an injunction against the university boards, it is not for the state of Florida to declare which viewpoints will be deemed orthodox and which will be forbidden from its university classrooms. If Judge Walker holding is to be respected, we must apply the same reasoning to the advanced placement African American studies to be taught in Florida classrooms. The First Amendment protects our students in allowing them to receive essential education on the history of African American and Black studies, the court held. The high school teachers are protected against being censored, ensuring an accurate retelling of our shared history in Florida, in America. And what is that shared history, brothers and sisters? It is that Black history is American history. 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 And so I will tell you this. Governor DeSantis is going to get a lesson of his own today from these young, brilliant students. Because as the Bible has taught us, God ordains strength out of the mouths of babes. And before you hear from these brilliant students who represent the best that we have to offer the future, I want to have you hear a little bit about the technical arguments of the lawsuit that will be filed or interplayed in the current lawsuit that is in the federal courts from a great lawyer, a great advocate, Attorney Craig Wisenhunt.
All right. All right. So good afternoon. Good afternoon. I know that everyone's truly excited to hear technical legal arguments at the end of a lot of rousing speeches, but bear with me. I want to start by pointing out that one of the reasons this lawsuit is so important is because if we do not learn from our history, we are doomed to repeat it. And we have been here before, and Ron DeSantis clearly did not learn from history. Back in 2010, a Republican-led government in Arizona tried this very same thing regarding Mexican-American studies. And it took years, nearly 7, before a federal court shut that down. Because the government doesn't get to entangle itself in the education of students when it comes to a point of view. There are equal protections under the law. And this effort by the governor disproportionately affects only some.
Yep.
Right? There are protections to content-oriented speech. And this only intends to limit some content. Right? The content that applies to African American studies and African American students' histories, our Black communities. It doesn't speak to the traditions of white America, only that which Governor DeSantis seems to take exception to, which seems to be time and time again the minorities in the state of Florida. My mother was an elementary school librarian. I grew up around public schools and the idea of making sure information was available to everyone. And I had a chance on my drive up here for 4.5 hours through the rain to speak with her. She had lots of thoughts and probably could put a lot of them more eloquently than I can. But at one point we got to the topic of, well, is Governor DeSantis racist? Yes. And I said, you know what? I don't know, because that's between Governor DeSantis and God. That's right. But I know that what he is doing has racist consequence.
Come on now.
And that is between the governor and the law.
Yeah.
All right? He is terrified of this concept of being awake, because he is living in a dreamland where he is king and only his views matter.
Well,
This lawsuit, if it comes down to it, if we have to exercise our remedies through the courts, has been litigated in the past successfully against the government on the governor's own arguments. Once again, and this is going to be again inside of a few weeks, we will find ourselves in the position of a federal court telling the world that Ron DeSantis is violating the federal Constitution and the Florida State Constitution again. These students deserve better than the leadership we have seen so far. This country deserves better than Ron DeSantis' flawed sense of priorities and questionable views on morality and race. We can do better, and if we have to do it through the courts, we will.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Wisenhunt. First, we will hear from a young man, Elijah Edwards. Take your time. Take your time.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Okay. Dear Governor DeSantis, this is not a school assignment or random spillings from a kid who doesn't know anything, but this is a factual account of how I personally feel about your decision to deny me and my fellow students our rightfully deserved AP African American Studies class. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Elijah Edwards. I'm a lamplighter, community leader, and 10th grade gifted and magnet student at Sale High School. As I have gone through my years of schooling as a black kid in Florida, I have realized that I have not learned much about the history or culture of my people outside of my parents and close relatives. This fact unsettled me for some time. But after I heard that there might be an African American Studies AP class, I was ecstatic, because next year I will be taking AP classes and wanted that class to be one of them. I could already imagine the insightful discussions and daily new history facts. But instead of approving the class and giving me and my fellow students around Florida a glimmer of hope to learn about the roots of our lineage, Governor DeSantis decided to deny the potentially life-changing class and effectively censor the freedom of our education and shield us from the truths of our ancestors. I can't believe that this is 2023 and America is talking about censoring education. This is America, not a communist nation. I thought here in this country, we believed in the free exchange of ideas, not the suppression of it. I don't expect much to change in Mr. DeSantis' mind, but he has the power to work with the College Board to approve the valuable curriculum that is so desperately needed. I hope he does. It would make it so Florida students have the opportunity to expand their horizons and learn about not only their cultures, but those of their classmates. This diversity is what makes both Florida and America so wonderful and unique. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Elijah. And his parents are also here with him. Thank you. Next, we will hear from Ms. Juliet Heckman.
Good afternoon. My name is Juliet Heckman, and I'm a junior at Leon High School here in Tallahassee, Florida. Over the past 2.5 years, I've had the privilege of taking 4 AP courses, 3 of which have been history related. These classes have further advanced my knowledge of the world around me, as each class offers thorough evidence, viewpoints, and reasoning based on its designated topic. When I heard the news that there was an AP course in the works that was designated specifically to African American studies, I was grateful. Grateful in the sense that this side of history, one which is notoriously ignored and disregarded, would finally be given the proper and sufficient representation that it deserves. I was grateful that there was an interdisciplinary course that not only goes into depth on the history of African Americans, but also emphasizes the contributions made by them that have built the foundation of our country itself. Now, you can only imagine how me and many of my classmates felt when we recently learned that because we live in the state of Florida, we would not be given the opportunity to take this course because it, and I quote, lacks educational value. Every single AP course that I have taken has significantly advanced my knowledge and understanding of our world and has inspired me to learn more, and I have full confidence that this course would be no different. Simply because Florida lawmakers may be uncomfortable or even afraid with the course's criteria because it is too woke, does not grant them the right to take away this opportunity from thousands of students across the state.
That's right.
Times are changing, education is expanding, and students have higher levels of curiosity than ever before. It is not fair for our education to be constricted under the ignorant opinions of those who reject a course that is designed to only advance our understanding of the world around us. This is not a course of indoctrination. It's a course that dives deep into the history, culture, arts, literature, and advancements that African Americans have and continue to make in our country. A greater understanding of this honest history is necessary in order to fully comprehend our country's origins and the contributions that have been made to lead us to where we are today. Thank you.
You are, yeah. I saw the thing, I wasn't sure. I saw you moving, I was like, oh, maybe nobody's saying it.
Yeah, I know it's yours. I was in there. It was, I guess, really early, so like, you know.
How are you?
Spreading out.
Good to see you. Good to be seeing you.
I just move over.
One more thing after this, knock on wood.
What's that?
The 2 o'clock in here.
Oh, yeah. Then I'll have to write a script and piece.
Oh, okay. And an early start, so.
That's the easy part with this part.
Yeah, that sounds boring.
So I have to keep a little profile and just get why.
Well,
I think it's also
already have one.
which is nice. What about you guys seem to never show same argument that they had 2 years ago.
Not today. Where did we meet yesterday?
Yeah,
We did like 14 things yesterday.
yeah.
Oh, the luncheon. Second something that said, I just explained that they've already hit the ceiling. What that means. It triggered him to take extraordinary measures to
No, I just saw that. I was
I
going
don't
to
know
sign.
what it is.
Oh, yeah.
Don't ask me what those measures are.
I think you're safe quoting. Wednesday. Oh, that's a good one.
That's just one empty space.
I usually put teaching class on just keep them
Honestly, I would, except the DASSER requires specific. It's not the general EFR.
Yep. No, it's not taken. It's open. Sorry.
No, it's raining.
Really? I lost my umbrella too.
Oh, it's coming down hard.
I'm gonna level it up.
Too bad it's not a little colder.
I'm actually surprised it's not snowed yet. Last year it snowed by January.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to use start stop. I'll record it.
Yeah, for sure. Last year, only once. I thought it was a little bit more last year. That's crazy. Heads up, they're coming up now. Thank you. What? It seems like there's enough people, yeah, for sure.
Democrat
Good afternoon, everybody, and it's my pleasure for the first and certainly won't be the last to welcome my friend, colleague, and the great Democratic leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, to our Senate gallery. We'll be going over there. You'll be hearing a lot from us together, and let me call on Hakeem. Start it off.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with Leader Chuck Schumer, who's done an extraordinary job over the last several years, ushering into law an incredible agenda on behalf of the American people to make life better for everyday Americans, which is what drives House Democrats, Senate Democrats, certainly President Biden. And we're thankful for President Biden's leadership. And as House Democrats, we're thankful for the tremendous leadership of Chuck Schumer. The Republicans continue to double and triple down on their extreme agenda. We know they're extreme as it relates to reproductive freedom. We believe in a woman's freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions. Republicans want to impose a nationwide ban. We believe in Social Security and Medicare. Extreme MAGA Republicans want to destroy Social Security and Medicare. We believe in democracy. Many extreme MAGA Republicans apparently don't believe in democracy anymore. They have an extreme agenda. It continues. And the so-called Fair Tax Act is another example of the extremist agenda that Republicans are trying to jam down the throats of the American people. The so-called Fair Tax Act is unfair, unconscionable, and un-American. It will impose a tax hike that is dramatic on 90% of the American people, working families, middle-class folks, seniors, and those who aspire to be part of the middle class, the poor, the sick, and the afflicted. It will impose an age tax on older Americans in this nation who throughout their lives paid into the system through income tax and now will be double and triple taxed by the imposition of a 30% sales tax that would create an enormous burden on older Americans in this country. Third, this unfair tax act would detonate Social Security by eliminating its source of funding. This legislation is extreme, and it is functionally the GOP tax scam part 2. We will expose it, and under the tremendous leadership of Senate Democrats, Leader Schumer, in partnership with House Democrats, do everything we can to stop it.
Thank you, Hakeem. And I want to thank again Hakeem for being here. So this plan is dangerous. It's a disaster. It would impact just about every single American family for the worse. It cannot be understated how devastating this would be to just about every family. This so-called fair tax plan is the craziest yet. It's a real doozy. It's hard to believe they came up with it. It would completely abolish the IRS, no more IRS, and just impose a 30% tax on everything. So here, Americans are worried about inflation, and the Republican Party, many of them, are saying, we want to increase your price, what you pay, by another 30%. It'd be the largest tax increase for working Americans ever, ever. So the party, this MAGA Republican Party, has no concern for working people. Every single day, they're simply trying to have a new plan to cut more taxes on the wealthy and impose it on average working Americans. Steve Forbes, hardly a liberal, you know what he said? It would raise the cost of a house, of buying a house, by $125,000. It would raise the cost of buying a car by $10,000. It would raise your average grocery bill by $3,500 a year. People are complaining about the high prices of groceries. Eggs are already too high. They'd add another $1.50 for each dozen of eggs. Milk is high, another $1.70 more. Again, $3,500 on groceries. But it would also mean thousands in more that you'd have to pay in insurance premiums, in your out-of-pocket health care costs, and seniors who have saved and saved and saved for their retirements. First, we don't know if there'd be any more Social Security, but those who even have Social Security, it would mean they'd have 30% less buying power. Right away, a third lower. Almost every American family would be devastated. So let me just say this. As long as I am majority leader, this devastating, unfair, nasty, and almost crazy plan is not going to pass. Not going to happen in the Senate. Absolutely. But it shows you how extreme these MAGA Republicans are. I have rarely seen such an extreme proposal in all my years in government. They're so out of touch with reality. Do they know what average people go through? Do they know that the wealthy are the only people who during COVID were doing even better? They want to help them some more. And it would just, every American would have a tough, tough time making ends meet under this. I believe it could cause the next Great Depression if we were to impose it. Thank God there are firewalls in Leader Jeffries and the Democrats in the House. Thank God we have a Democratic majority in the Senate. So the craziness that they're going to try to do, believe me, these MAGA Republicans are intent on doing this, will not happen. Questions on this subject first?
Leader Schumer, the Congressional Budget Office put out a report saying that the Social Security program would be insolvent by 2033. What are Democrats doing to make sure that program remains solvent?
Look, we have always defended Social Security. We will always defend Social Security. Democrats had a plan to make sure that Social Security is solvent. This plan would kill Social Security. Yes.
Leader Schumer and Mayor Jeffries as well, if you could chime in on this. Basil Gentleman next start. We've already spoken to even some Republicans in the Senate who have stated they also would not side with this plan, like Senator Josh Hawley, for example. The fact that you already have so many Republicans, including House Leader Kevin McCarthy, saying no on this, why do you think some Republicans thought it was a good idea to go ahead with this?
Well, everyone thought that Leader McCarthy would never go along with the MAGA Republicans as he ran for Speaker. And now he is still committed to them to put this bill before committee. I don't underestimate the power over McCarthy of these extreme MAGA Republicans. We have to fight this plan now before it gains any more of a head of steam. Too many Republicans support it.
You know, this so-called tax plan, which would devastate working families and cut taxes for the wealthiest 1% in America, is so extreme, so out of touch, so unconscionable that you wonder, like, who's sitting in some dungeon, some laboratory, some basement, cooking up these extreme ideas to try to jam them down the throats of the American people? But that's what's happening. And it's part of the House Republican agenda, which is why we're speaking out against it, making it clear that the stakes are high to the American people. And we're going to work to fight to defeat it, expose it, and make it clear that it's part of an overall extreme agenda to undermine working families and the middle class in America in order to elevate the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected as part of some scheme, desire to subsidize further the lifestyles of the rich and shameless.
Thank you. You know, if someone told you that this was a real plan, you'd say, no, it never would be. But the right-wing MAGA Republicans are that far out that they actually believe in this. It's wild. It's unbelievable. As I said, it's just the biggest Lollapalooza I have ever seen around here. Yeah.
Senator Schumer.
This young lady.
Lisa.
Lisa.
Thank you. It's a different topic, though.
Let's stay on this topic for one or two more. Did you have one on this topic?
Senator Schumer, Mr. Jeffries, why is it important to highlight this when it would certainly die in the Senate, and I'm sure even a lot of Republicans would object it? Why is it important to highlight this now when it has little chance?
It's very important, first, to make sure this plan dies. As I said, the right-wing MAGA Republicans have a lot of power, certainly in the House. We saw that in the last week. But second, we have to show the American people who's on your side and who isn't. You get a lot of rhetoric about protecting working people from the other side. They're not protecting working people. They're they're harming working people in a way we've never seen before.
I think that's exactly right. And the extreme MAGA Republicans are trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the American people, which is why we need to expose them and their extreme plan. The fact that they're suggesting that this would cause increased fairness tells you everything you need to know in terms of why Leader Schumer, we're thankful for him and his Senate Democrats and our efforts in the House, need to expose the extremism. Public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. That's Abraham Lincoln. And so in this public sentiment discussion and debate, we're making sure the American people clearly understand why this so-called tax fairness plan will be a disaster for them.
I mean, again, I think it's very important for the American people to see how extreme the Republican Party has become. We'd like to have a nice mainstream Republican Party. We wouldn't agree with them, but we could actually get things done. I don't think a mainstream Republican Party would flirt with the devastation of a debt ceiling that is not, of defaulting on the debt. I think it's important to show how extreme these people are, how far out they are. Yes.
Since you brought up debt ceiling,
okay, we'll move to other subjects.
You have said that you want to see the Republican plan, whatever
Yes.
you want to see them put the cuts on the table. Senator Manchin suggested today that he would prefer to see Speaker McCarthy meet with President Biden to have a conversation about it. Do you find any value in the president negotiating with Speaker McCarthy about
Until
this topic?
Speaker McCarthy has a plan, and a plan that can pass in the House with his Republican support, his going to the White House is like going with no cards in his hand. The bottom line is, the first step, since McCarthy and many Republicans are playing brinksmanship, holding hostages, instead of doing what we've done 4 times with debt ceiling, 3 times under Trump, twice with Republican House, Senate, and President, instead playing that dangerous game of brinksmanship, it's incumbent on them to show, okay, what's your plan? We have a plan. Pass the debt ceiling without hostage taking, without any brinksmanship. What's their plan? They haven't shown it. They have an obligation on something as serious as the debt ceiling to show it. Show us the plan. Show the American people the plan. Show your own caucus the plan and see if you got the votes to pass it.
Mr. Jeffers, can you answer that question? Do you think the Speaker should meet with the President on debt ceiling?
I associate myself with the remarks of the distinguished gentleman from New York. There's a difference between negotiation and blackmail. Negotiation, as Leader Schumer has indicated, we have a plan, pass the debt ceiling consistent with what has been done under Democratic presidents and Republican presidents, including 3 times under former President Trump. And then we can have a negotiation, a discussion about the future of spending moving forward through the normal process, right? That's negotiation. But what they're essentially saying on the other side of the aisle is we will detonate Social Security, detonate Medicare, detonate veterans benefits, or possibly even risk a catastrophic default for the first time in American history that will send us spiraling toward a deep recession, if not a depression, unless you cave into our extreme MAGA Republican demands. That ain't negotiation. That's blackmail.
Thank you. Leader Jeffries, but care to weigh in? This is a House question. What are your plans for the 2 Intelligence Committee seats that Speaker McCarthy has rejected your selections for?
Well,
will you fill those, or?
My communication with Speaker McCarthy on this issue is in the public domain, and my letter speaks for itself. But in terms of the Intel Committee, we're in the process of formulating our entire slate, and I expect that will happen sooner rather than later.
Last question.
Leader Schumer, have you spoken with Speaker McCarthy on any negotiations that relates to deficit, debt, the debt limit, and if not, do you plan to?
Yes, I do plan to speak with Speaker McCarthy. Obviously, as Democratic leader of the Senate, and he's the Republican leader of the House, we have to try to get together and see what we can do in a bipartisan way. That's true. But on the debt ceiling, you know what I'd say to Speaker McCarthy when we sit down? Show us your plan.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
What you doing here? Oh, right. That was a good one.
No, I didn't. I don't really.
Really? That was
That was actually a good question. I was thinking.
Hey, you're welcome, Brian.
Do you want this?
Mayor and Channel 2. All have is thy heart.
Oh no. We just know.
No, I'm not talking about the exact same thing. I was had my hand in the was Thank you.
This guy, the national tax, sales tax thing.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is somebody, do I need to do this?
Yeah, that's cool. Good. Alan, I remember that.
Yeah, I don't think we actually met a
Yeah, I was going to say, I was like, I wouldn't support that. Wow. So, I was like, seems to be a lot of those.
Oh,
yeah.
From the house of like
I have to like look at it exactly. Apparently McCarthy also had said no, but that's why I wanted to ask the question. So you're just like, it's like a new team, or you're just expanded, like expanded, like it's just like, it's like saying like you really trust me, so that's like you're all held by. All right. Well, I'm paraphrasing, but like, it's like that we're just like, you can't just say.
Right now.
I gotta go back. I don't know my stress. Put all this together. Have fun, alright? It's like, I always wonder why.
Not yet.
We are kind of late up there. Well, the next 6 months is going to be like one question on the So what? Oh, yeah, there's going to be a lot of it's like a leaky faucet.
Yeah, you're good there. Good straight.
It's crooked. It's crooked.
Is this?
Yeah.
Yes, those.
Yeah, well, just shoot me an email.
Okay.
Use the little level on your iPhone.
Hey, there's a level on your iPhone.
The one time you ever get to use it.
No, they are supposed to be important part of my.
What is it? Is it the compass? Oh,
yeah, it's just like where to the other side. I just think it's that. I just think there's a leveler on your iPhone.
Got it.
Try to make it the same. I'm like doing like some. You were in shifts.
okay.
Regional level. I heard you guys. I know, right?
Well, that's actually pretty good. Yeah. Perfect.
That's perfect.
Perfectly balanced.
Okay, then make one.
I think it's fine. And then how are they going to get somebody, you know, it's like going to block them.
Yeah,
Well, are they going to, worst case, would you want to try to do? Then put on the other side? Yeah. They are. They see us, right? I think that's so I know Kelly and I know. Oh my gosh, you look really similar. Yeah, you gotta talk. There you are. I got my third
This is going to be my last. I hope. There's nothing else going on, right?
There's literally not a single person. It's better than when you're on the
Well, you could. Did you get to see them? When did you get here? You done for the day? Good for you.
Or even like an opinion, like a
wow.
I'm interested in this too. Because who I am being here, we're in see this chandeliers? Yes, yes. I know the squad. Used to be Allie, right? Before Allie was Allie.
What's that? It's here till 8:30.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, you were good in your nation, but I know. Yeah.
Tough for you.
Okay.
I wasn't even paying attention.
Yeah, originally, but it was just in Harrison.
I was just snapping away, but I had to go chase down sample stuff. I don't know. I know I got him leaving last night, so. I know. Like I think we should be good on him as well.
Yeah. Got a few of these if anyone wants to take one pass around. Something at center of all my comments. Yeah, they can.
We ended up doing 2 hits, though. Yeah. It was worth it. Yeah.
Well, I want to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. There'll be more members joining us. I'm Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. I'm the bean counter of the group, so I guess I'm going to lead off this press conference. I'll start just by saying when I got here and when Senator Paul got here in 2011, we were $14.8 trillion in debt. We're spending about $3.6 trillion a year. Revenue is about $2.3 trillion. That obviously shows a $1.3 trillion deficit. Right now, today, currently, we're about $31.5 trillion in debt. We've doubled that over the course. Now, I don't think we're to blame, but it happened while we were here, and we didn't like it at all. The day after the November election, I wrote a column, the Wall Street Journal published it, and what it was is just trying to lay out, if we got the majority here, how we could return function and fiscal sanity to Congress. Now, obviously, we didn't get the majority, so we're not in charge of this, but the House does have a Republican majority, and I was very pleased to see in the whole speaker battle there, and I know it looked a little messy, but I think they accomplished some very good things, because I think hopefully what they did get Speaker McCarthy to agree to is restoring function. And what do I mean by that? We're talking about passing a budget, hopefully one that is as conservative as possible, close to balance as possible. If we can't balance it, well, we're going to have to increase the debt ceiling. But if we do that, we need to use the debt ceiling for the way it was intended to be used. You attach to it fiscal controls. I laid out 4 possibilities. These are just suggestions. Preventing Government Shutdown Act, the REINS Act, the Full Faith and Credit Act, and one that's near and dear to my heart, one of the first pieces of legislation I introduced, reducing the size of the federal government through Attrition Act. You don't have to fire anybody, just quit hiring them. Okay? But anyway, that kind of like that, and then also just talk about, but then bring up, use that budget process to bring up individual appropriation bills. Now, why is that important? First of all, you understand the dysfunction of passing these massive omnibus spending bills 2, 3, 4 months into a fiscal year, thousands of pages, nobody reads them, and it just gets passed. Individual appropriation bills, they'll still be massive, but we'll be able to focus on the particular department. We'll be able to do greater oversight. Because part of the problem we have is we just never look at the numbers. And I've got the chart over here. I thought it was interesting when we were going through that debate prior to the omnibus vote. I was asking reporters, I was asking my colleagues, do you know how much we spent last year in the federal government? And quite honestly, nobody knew. But it wasn't their fault. Nobody knew because we never even talked about it. And I think when I told people $6.3 trillion, a lot of people were shocked. I think most people were shocked. And they should be shocked. Because if you take a look in 2019, prior to the pandemic, we spent $4.4 trillion. That was in all federal government spending was $4.4 trillion. Had the pandemic not occurred, had we not busted the budget with, unfortunately, an awful lot of wasteful spending reacting to it, and just grown that $4.4 trillion by the rate of inflation and population, last year we would have spent $5.1 trillion. Why do I point that out? Because we're so tantalizing, or we would have been so tantalizingly close to balancing the budget, because last year we got $4.9 trillion worth of revenue. So we need to understand these numbers. We as a Congress need to be looking at these accounts, at these departments. We need to fully understand how the federal government is spending the taxpayers' hard-earned money, and we're not doing it right now. So I think there are a number of us that are talking to our House colleagues, meeting with them. I think the main purpose of this press conference, from my standpoint, is to offer support. That they're in the driver's seat. They can pass these bills. They can make this happen. Now, what happens to what they pass in the Senate? That's the next step. But initially, we want to convey to our House colleagues that we respect what they've done. They've got a big task ahead of them. We want to do everything we can to support their efforts, but also encourage them, because the crucial aspect to what they need to do is they have to pass these things with Republican votes. Now, there's a number of us who have never voted for an increase in the debt ceiling. Now, I would vote for an increase in the debt ceiling if we attach to it certain fiscal controls. And we as senators who have taken that position in the past, we need to, again, provide that support for our colleagues in the House, fiscal conservatives, that also will take votes they've never taken in the past. But if we want to have the best result, they're going to have to take those types of votes this year. So again, we're trying to be supportive here. We'll be talking, we'll be meeting with them. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Senator Cruz.
Over the past 2 decades, Congress has been bankrupting our nation. Go back to the year 2000. Our national debt was $5 trillion. That sounds like a wildly different world than where we are today, because it was a wildly different world. Think about that for a moment. 42 presidents over the course of more than 2 centuries had built up a total debt of $5 trillion. Then a Republican came into office, George W. Bush. And over the next 8 years, under a Republican president, our national debt went from $5 trillion to $10 trillion. We doubled the national debt in just 8 years. Then a Democrat came into office, Barack Obama. And over the next 8 years, the national debt doubled yet again, going from $10 trillion to $20 trillion. Now pause and reflect on that. 42 presidents over 2 centuries built $5 trillion in debt. 2 presidents, 1 Republican and 1 Democrat, over just 16 years, quadrupled our national debt. And now, over the last 6 years, again with a Republican president and a Democrat president, we've seen national debt grow from $20 trillion to $31.5 trillion. This is unsustainable. The American people at home, if you're fed up with inflation, if you're fed up with the cost of food skyrocketing, with the cost of electricity, of rent, of lumber, of mortgages, of gasoline, of cars, of everything you buy, it's because politicians in Washington cannot stop spending money that we don't have. Now, we are at a moment in time, because the American people elected a Republican majority in the House, where we have an opportunity to stop the madness. And I believe it is incumbent on that Republican majority and on Republicans in the Senate to use every lever point we have to stop the out-of-control spending that is driving inflation, that is punishing hardworking Americans across this country. As everyone here is writing, the debt ceiling is coming up. And the debt ceiling historically has proven the most effective lever point to force meaningful concessions. Now let me dispense with a canard. Nobody standing here wants to default on the debt. Let me be absolutely clear and unequivocal. The United States of America should never, ever, ever default on its debt. And whether or not the debt ceiling is raised immediately, the United States will not default on its debt. Why? Because revenue that comes in each month exceeds the interest payments that are owed. There is more than sufficient revenue coming in to ensure we never default on the debt. And every one of us supports legislation. Legislation I call the Default Prevention Act, to put that in statute, to make clear the chances of a default are 0.00%. The reason the Default Prevention Act hasn't been passed is the Democrats block it. There is one principal person in this town that is talking about a default in the debt, and that is Joe Biden. Joe Biden wants to threaten a default in the debt. He wants to scare the markets. And frankly, he's counting on y'all. He's counting on the press corps just to repeat his talking points. He's counting on the press corps just to say, those crazy Republicans want to default on the debt. That is false. And if you write that in your stories, you are simply repeating partisan talking points from the White House. Historically, the debt ceiling has proven incredibly effective. In 2011, by standing strong on the debt ceiling, the Republican majority in the House forced passage of the Budget Control Act, the most significant constraint in federal spending in modern times. When I arrived here in 2013, Republican leadership was crowing about the great fiscal responsibility they saw because of the Budget Control Act. And then they turned around and abandoned it a couple of years later. You go back before that, Graham Rudman, the most significant structural restraint on spending, passed because Congress held up the debt ceiling and used its leverage to force those reforms. And so I'm going to urge the members of the press, as this fight plays out, report it accurately. The rules of the Republican conference provide not that we will never raise the debt ceiling. It is not my position that we will never raise the debt ceiling. Rather, what the rules say is we will use the debt ceiling as leverage to force real and meaningful structural reforms to fix the underlying problem. It doesn't have to be a total solution for everything, but it has to be real and meaningful progress. And I will point out those rules that were written in the rules, I wrote them alongside the other senators who are standing up here today. That is the official position of the Republican conference. So we're going to see lots of fireworks, we're going to see lots of drama, we're going to see lots of Democrats. By the way, Joe Biden's position is facially unreasonable and ridiculous. Here's Joe Biden's position. I refuse to negotiate anything. That's what he's telling you. I don't care that there's a Republican majority. I don't care that we're bankrupting the country. I don't care that there's inflation ravaging this country. I, Joe Biden, will negotiate nothing. To hell with you. Let's default. That's Joe Biden's position. And on its face, it is objectively unreasonable. The reason he can take that objectively unreasonable position is because he believes the press will protect him. He believes that in your coverage, you won't talk about how it's objectively unreasonable for the president to say, I don't care what the Congress says. My answer is hell no. He's counting on you for that. That's unreasonable. It's irresponsible. And we're here to encourage the members of the House and the members of the Senate to hold the line and get serious about fixing this problem.
President Biden says he won't negotiate over raising the debt ceiling. I have news for him. He absolutely will negotiate. Conservatives will not vote to raise the debt ceiling. The majority in the House, the Republican majority in the House, will not vote to raise the debt ceiling without significant budget reform. The greatest threat to our country is, and the greatest threat to our national security is the debt. One of the great things about where we are now, though, is it really doesn't take as much as you would think to actually balance the budget. In Europe, over half of the countries balance their annual budget. We think of Europe, of Germany and Sweden, of having these large governments, and they do, but they're actually fiscally responsible in the sense that they spend what comes in. We could do it in our country. If we were to have a $100 billion cut, which would still have us spending way more than we spent before COVID, a $100 billion cut in free spending, we would balance our budget in just 4 years. This is amazing. We have an opportunity here. It could be done, but it would take compromise between both parties. Republicans would have to give up the sacred cow that says we will never touch a dollar in military, and the Democrats would have to give up the sacred cow that they will never touch a dollar in welfare. Everything would have to be looked across the board. No one has a sacred area that would be immune, and when you make the cuts across the board, they aren't as big as you'd actually think they would be. It's a responsible thing to do, but President Biden needs to know, absolutely, he will negotiate, and it's better to start now.
First, I want to thank the House. There's a lot of things the House has done in the last 3 weeks to do exactly what they campaigned on. And my goal is that the city start doing the exact same thing. We have a Republican Party out around the country. We need to have a Republican Party here, and Republicans need to stop caving. With regard to the debt ceiling, the far left, the big government crowd, and Wall Street tell you all the time, they put out all the time, you have to spend more money, run up more debt, and raise taxes. And if you ever say that you need to stop, then they say the world will end, and we'll have plagues that even Moses would flinch at. It is a complete lie. We can balance the budget, right? Our states do it, countries do it. Now, if we don't balance the budget, who makes money? Well, DC bureaucrats do really well. The people that make money off of government, they do really well. Wall Street sells a whole bunch more bonds, they do really well. The rich are going to continue to get richer. And guess what happens to the American public? Their mortgage rates go up, their credit card interest rates go up, eggs cost more, meat costs more, and the average American is paying for all this. Now, I did this. I did this when I was governor. I walked in with a $4 billion budget deficit, and the same thing happened. If you don't spend more money, borrow more money, Florida had borrowed in net additional $1 billion a year for 20 straight years, and they were going into default on their debt. We balanced the budget. We actually cut taxes. In 8 years, we grew our economy, I think, by over 20%, and we had 1.7 million jobs. This is all doable, and if we don't, when anyone goes to the grocery store this week, you can blame everybody in D.C. that's not willing to live within our means for your interest rates going up and the cost of your eggs and meat going up.
So you heard Senator Cruz talk about how quickly we got into this pickle. Basically just a little over 20 years, which gives you a little bit of extrapolate that into the future. And the only politician who's had the nerve to put a budget out has been from the president, Biden. So he, unapologetic about it, shows us from this $31 trillion we're in debt, taking all of us to $45 trillion in just 10 years. And that's way under the mark because interest rates have gone up 4 percentage points by the Fed here recently. So a couple of little fun facts. You remember before Christmas I asked a reporter to tell me what 1% of 30 trillion was? Anybody remember that? Remember, it wasn't easy to come up with it, and the first guess was 300 million. Well, it's 300 billion. The numbers I just gave you in terms of what Biden is unapologetically and brazenly saying for the future of our country, 45 trillion in debt, doesn't take into consideration the interest cost and the crowding out. And the reason I want you to know what 1% of 30 trillion is, take 4% of 30 trillion. That's the interest that's going to get priced in to the cost of carrying this debt. You do the math with what we're currently paying in interest, that's as much interest as we just spent on that monstrosity of an omnibus bill that just went through the door at 1.7 trillion. And these are numbers for future generations. You ought to just think, what the heck is going on? Who is running the show? And the other thing Senator Cruz said, it's been an equal opportunity endeavor between Democrats and Republicans. Because the folks that have been running the place have been looting the place in the sense that, sure, with the printing press in the basement, with a credit card that you can swipe year after year, any knucklehead could do that. And really, knuckleheads have been getting us into the place we are now. And remember the numbers. The numbers always rule in the long run. The heavy weight of that burden will be unescapable and will be painful if you don't do what Senator Paul talked about. Exercise a little political discipline and will. Quit trying to please everyone, and that means defense and domestic, and maybe you'll get the ship turned in the right direction.
Bipartisanship is very common in some areas and less common in others. Tragically, increasing the debt ceiling has been a bipartisan venture. And it's happened in a way that sort of pits us together as Americans, not as Democrats against Republicans, so much as Washington, D.C. and Wall Street against everyone else. America's poor and middle class have been ravaged by this pattern and practice of abuse, one that enriches a small handful of elites at the cost of everyone else. I keep thinking about how prices have increased over the last couple of years. Just in the last couple of years, the average Utah family's monthly living expenses have gone up $1,000 a month every single month. That's a recurring expense. That is the direct, foreseeable, and in fact foreseen and avoidable result of Congress pushing the button over and over and over again to effectively print more money. You see, that's what happens when you just print more money, as you effectively do, when you spend trillions of dollars a year more than you have, and you increase the debt ceiling, authorizing the issuance of new U.S. debt instrument. That creates more money moving through circulation, which means every dollar that someone has to buy bread, eggs, milk, or to pay for housing, transportation, or whatever it is, it buys less. Most people don't see their incomes rising, if they're rising at all. They don't see them rising commensurate with inflation, not even close. And so as a result, poor and middle class Americans are being ravaged. It really is tragic that this has happened with such bipartisan cooperation, or I would say collusion. The reason is, if either party, if sufficient members of either party had at any point stepped in and said, enough, let's not do this, things might have been different. And it's a lot easier to stop additional harm from happening than to undo previous harm. So this has gone on far too long. It's disappointing to us that a lot of members of our own party have been unwilling to do the difficult things. We are hoping and expecting this time that it may be different. We understand that there are a lot of realities that we have to face, but one of those realities is this: the overall number is simply too big. We're going to devastate not only the poor and middle class of this country even further if we don't stop this, but we're also simultaneously going to impair the federal government's ability to fund everything from Social Security and Medicare to defense and everything in between if we don't change course. It's one of the reasons why, as a conference in the last year or two, the Senate Republican Conference adopted a policy statement, and that policy statement is echoed in a letter that I've authored and that's been joined so far by a couple dozen of my colleagues. We're still collecting signatures. A letter addressed to President Biden in which we echo our conference position, in which we explain what it is that we're going to do. The conference position itself says that it's our policy that, quote, any increase in the debt ceiling must be accompanied by cuts in federal spending of an equal or greater amount as the debt ceiling increase, or meaningful structural reform in spending. And so, look, it's got to be different. It has to be, because the consequences of staying on the same course are too devastating for us to contemplate, certainly too devastating for us to accept.
Any questions? Sure.
Senator Johnson, I understand and what Senator Cruz said earlier about the leverage point that you have here, but when we're talking about debt ceiling and we talk about spending, they are two different pieces of legislation functionally. So how would you go about this? What would make you feel comfortable in voting for raising for the debt ceiling? Are you talking about the next spending package? Are you talking about cuts to an existing spending package? And just functionally, what would that legislative package look like that you would feel comfortable
Again,
supporting?
they're already enacting special measures, and that will go on for months, potentially. Again, we're looking for the conservatives in the House, Republicans, to lead in this effort. And we're going to hopefully influence what they're asking for in exchange for an increase in the debt ceiling as they're putting together their budget. I mean, it's all wrapped up together. You have the budget. If the budget's not balanced, you're going to have to increase the debt ceiling. You're going to have, you're going to have to increase it anyway because of what has been agreed to in the past. But we can't really predict exactly when those votes are going to come. But we're just before you here today saying that in order for us and hopefully our Republican colleagues to agree to increase the debt ceiling, whether it's once or twice, we need to attach to it fiscal controls or other spending cuts. Exactly what those are, we're not willing to lay out here today. We're going to be doing that in consultation with the House.
I mean, that would be a big part of it, though, right? What you're willing to cut? Like, at what point would you, I mean, Senator Paul, you alluded to it, that you've got to touch things like the Pentagon, you've got to touch entitlement programs probably. At what point will Republicans definitively say, these are the programs that we think should be cut and how much they should be cut by.
We can't really say that again. I'm personally more concerned about the structural changes right now. I mean, the Preventing Government Shutdown Act, the RAINS Act, full faith and credit. And that's an important piece of legislation. I think Senator Scott is reintroducing that. That was a Pat Toomey bill. And that just basically says with the revenue coming in, there's no reason whatsoever to default. Senator Cruz was correct. I mean, this is a scare tactic. We have more than enough revenue coming in to pay Social Security benefits, Medicare benefits, interest on the debt, service our debt, and a lot more spending.
When we did this in 2011, they were linked in the same legislation, and you simply institute caps. So if you put caps on numbers, then it's determined by the different committees where exactly they will cut, and then it takes time to get up each individual things. There's no reason why raising the debt ceiling can't have spending caps or limitations on spending in the same bill.
I'm going to say one thing too on that. So recently, did you hear the news where the Pentagon did an